Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. Very, very happy to be here with you today, as well as with our good friend, Leo Vieira. And he is talking to us from Westminster, Maryland, in the US. And he's going to be talking about God and our relationship with the Creator as a part of our series of lectures, Seeds of Knowledge. It is so good to be here. And for those who do not know Leo, let me formally introduce him now. Leonardo Vieira is one of the founders and workers of the Spiritist Society of Baltimore, SSB. He has conducted and helped with several works there, including study groups, mediumship meetings, and public discussions such as this. He has a bachelor's degree in business administration. He also has a master's degree in management with a specialization in Homeland Security. Professionally, he works for a major institution as a banker. It is so good to have you here, Leo. I appreciate you coming to our Sunday lectures in English in this case, and I appreciate. I'm going to go to the backstage, and please take it away.
Thank you, Masha. Thank you, everyone, and welcome, everyone. As she said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening for those who are going to be watching this at a different time. What a pleasure to be here, bringing some seeds, not mine, but the seeds that I have discovered with Spiritism, and yet to bear fruits. Let's put it this way. In other words, what we learned, what we are studying together, it applies to myself as well. And I am by far yet to, like I said, bear fruit of these amazing seeds. So hopefully you'll be able to take the information that we're bringing here and spread it in see it grow as well as to bear fruits in with other people as well. So what are we talking about today? God and our relationship with the Creator. This, as you can see here, I'll tell you straight through. This is actually an effort that was put together by our friends at the United States Spirits Federation, where we came together and we presented a chapter of this amazing book called Initiation into Spiritism by Terezinha Oliveira. They prescribed me to study chapter 14 entitled Christian Confession and Communion and to present it as well. And I found very interesting because this really made me connect with my connection with my relationship with the creator, right? When we talk about confession, communion, what comes to mind for you, right? What sparks, what kind of feeling sparks within ourselves? One of the things that in my trajectory within Spiritism, and I'll open up parentheses here to share this with you. I was not born a Spiritist. In other words, I was not in a Spiritist family. My parents did not attend to church every week or religiously, like we like to say, right? And I came to learn about Spiritism here in the US. And this is about, I would say, 1999, when I first came in contact with Spiritism the way I did it. I actually had heard about it many times in Brazil. I was born and raised in Brazil and moved here to the US early in life as well. But the Spiritism really came about around 1999 2000, and one of the things that I personally like to say, which I'll make a connection to what we're saying here, is that we tend to get all the information, all the details from this amazing science called Spiritism, as well as the philosophical aspects that comes with it, and obviously its religious aspects that we get from the science, and form a character, but a character of reason rather than reason and the feelings, right? And what one of the shifts that has been happening not only within myself, but I talk to a lot of people who also are looking at this aspect, which is the feelings, right? How this reason now comes and support the feelings, right? And gives the foundation to the feelings to flourish in a more positive way. And this is exactly one of the things that happened here. Taking this information and saying, okay, confession communion, what kind of feelings does spark in our hearts? And it was through this that we are start studying this idea of a good relationship with Creator being the key element for spiritual progress, right? Through this idea of confession communion. So we're going to talk about some of the things that we have done in the past, is still doing, and how can we shift? What is Spiritism bringing to us in terms of establish this communion with God, right, in a more elevated, in a more positive way, rather than the very in somewhat subjective as well as very demanding, for lack of better words, how we connect with our creator. So let's see what we're going to analyze here today. I would like to really ask some questions, right? Just to kind of spark our ideas, our feelings as well. What should we confess in this idea of confession communion? What should I confess? What is in within us that we need to confess, right? How should I confess? What is the physical, element or condition that we have to address in order for us to confess, as well as, how do we confess to God or to one another, in terms of, the people, right? Who should we confess, as well as, just to mention the people, and why should we do it? Is there a reason? Is there a must? What's the purpose of all of this, right? This kind of gets us to think: is this something necessary? Is it Does it help me? Does it help others? Right? All of these questions comes to mind when we engage in this idea of confession. Let's take just a moment to shift a little bit, and then we go back to the idea of confession, right? First of all, I'd like to address a couple of things. Since we're talking about our relationship with the Creator, we need to address what Spiritism bring to us in terms of what is the Creator, right? And it changes our perspective, hopefully, um, and readdresses of what we have learned in the past, right? It's a shift for some. For some, it's like, oh, no brainer, great, yes, I get this, but we're not going to dive into it and really digest too much. We're just going to say it. And I want you to pay attention to how the questions, as well as the answers that we're going to read here, these three passages, touches your heart, right? So the first question of the Spirit's book, in when we study God, right? The first part of the book, the Kardec actually asks the Spirit, "What is God?" Right? When we say this word, when we say this phrase, is it very simplistic to you? Does it help? Would you like to add anything to it? Um, think about it, right? What is God? Instead of, or of saying who is God, or anything that comes along. You can go back to the book. Obviously, I urge you to go and read it. But let's stay right here. What is God? Ask yourself, what is God, right? And try to establish a connection with the Creator, right? The spirits very wisely explain that God is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things. Hopefully, you're listening to this now, and or if you're listening to this, throughout the day, or at night, whatever that may be. But in the morning, it's so good. I like to go back to right now. It's 9 o'clock when we're presenting this together, a little past 9, that our minds are fresh, right? It's morning, and it's very easy for us to take a concept and start to think about it, digest about it. So God is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things. And how this relates with me, how this touched my heart, my feelings, just not only reason, but also the other side, right? The our emotions, right? So what's my it has my relationship with the creator changed with the question and the answer as well, right? Again, we're not going to talk about it much right now. I just want you to get this feeling and kind of like really think about the the question and answer. The next question that I would like to touch on is can be found on the third part of the Spirit's book. It's the first chapter. The third part of the Spirit's book actually studies the natural laws. Very beautiful as well. It's, to me, is one of the best parts of the book, but that's just Leo. And the question is, what is the most perfect standard that God has offered to humankind as a guide and model? And again, what are the feelings that comes about in our hearts, right? The answer is very wisely is Jesus. And then there's a comment. Jesus is the highest standard of moral perfection to which humankind may aspire on earth. God offers him as the most perfect model, and the doctrine that he taught is the purest expression of God's law. Because he was animated by this divine spirit and was the purest being that has ever walked the earth. Amazing, right? And yeah, it's beautiful. But again, how does this touch me, right? How can this perfect model help me, right, in this part of my evolution? Because we have quite a bit more to see, quite a bit more to learn. Sorry that I burst your bubble with this and at this time, but yes, excuse me, we have many things to learn still. So let us take it this part of our life right now. How is this helping me, right? In not only the character Jesus that we know that we have learned through our different uh, uh, moments of our different reincarnations, but right now the excuse me. The third actually element that I'd like to share here with you, it can be found, it is in the book too, that we mentioned before by Terezinha, is if therefore, sorry, can be found in Matthew as well, chapter 5, verse 23 and 24. We learned that what? That if therefore, when you present your offering on the altar, you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift at the foot of the altar and go first to be reconciled with your brother, and afterward return to offer your gift. When we think about connecting with God, stopping, praying, right, addressing this Creator, this supreme intelligence as well, through the works that we learn from Jesus, Spiritism. Um, if you are Protestant, if you are any religion whatsoever, that you're addressing the Creator, and we have something against us or something that is bothering us, let us go back, let us readdress, right? Not much to say. I wanted to go ahead and create this environment where we're truly diving into this connection with our Creator as well as our Master Jesus, right? And we're gonna do some connections as we talk about this here with this here. Going back now to the Christian confession and communion. What is confessing, right? Terezinha wants to in the book, going back to the book, Terezinha wanted to us to understand this idea of confession. Confession has two meanings really. The first one is really interesting because we often put aside this idea that is to declare or to acknowledge. Jesus wanted all his followers to confess him before all people. Then this can be found in Luke chapter 12, 8, 9. That is to acknowledge him, acknowledge him and declare him as their spiritual master. Again, it's not that Jesus, it's we're acknowledging Jesus as the character, but his teachings, what he taught us, what he brought to us, right? What he helped us, on the ways that he helped us grow and multiply it. That's what Jesus wants us to do. It's not necessarily to say, okay, I believe in Jesus. And those who come, do you believe in Jesus or not? And obviously, there were a lot of persecution in that, in at the time of Christ and thereafter as well. For we can study this later at a different time. But there was this, this acknowledgement of Jesus to not go bear some sufferings in life. Like, let's put it that way. But the calling here is again to confess, to acknowledge through good deeds, good things in our lives, right? The second is to admit the reality of a fact, an error or a fault, which is the one that we connect the most. It is with this meaning that we usually employ the word confessing. It is important to know how to acknowledge the correctness or error of our actions or attitudes, then persevere in what is right or start correcting what is wrong. So again, calling to for us to acknowledge something that was done wrong, or that we are at fault, right? And saying, look, I would like to confess that I made an error, and I need to address this, right? To see how again, Leo just mentioned these words. I mean, sometimes we say things we're not even paying attention, right? But we already have a different idea of confessing, not necessarily like what we learn from the church, that we sit next to a person and we say A, B, and C, and then something is prescribed to us, which you will see later on here. And there are three ways that we can confess as well: the inner confession directly to God, to one another, as we do sometimes, with one person or couple, and also the public confession, right? And we're going to analyze them, separately here so we can also make some points in this idea. Never forgetting two things: our connection to our Creator, back again, all the teachings of our Master Jesus in our lives, right? And how we take this connection and we develop in terms of how we talk to our Creator in the moment that we have with them, right? Going to the altar, going to that special place in our homes, whether in bed, whether at a specific room in our homes, or when we go to church, when we go to a congregation at the Spirit Center as well. We see that inner confession directly to God. We learn that is, as Paul says, let a person examine himself, then and really dive into within themselves and talk to God, talk to our Creator. Some people, they're afraid to they don't like to pray. They don't like to say their prayers right out loud. They say it inwards, right? Connecting to God. They're very private. They don't know how to express themselves. They sometimes they lack words, right? In all this ways to talk to our Creator. In a parable in Luke, Jesus tells us that a tax collector in inner confession made a fair evaluation of his spiritual state, pleading for divine protection in order to improve himself. And by proceeding this way, he obtained the benefit he had asked for. A inner confession is made when the subject does not require greater communication with our fellow beings, or to avoid unnecessary, harming or overwhelming other with sorrows and problems. And then we have uh, to one another. This is beautiful because it connects us with one another. It allows us to share our struggles, our difficulties, and reminds us that we are in the same path, right? We're together. Now, we have to be careful because not everybody is in a position where we can really confess to one another. Unfortunately, we lack the responsibility of being able being in a position of hearing someone, of listening to someone. Here what I say is listening. Sometimes we just like to, we hear somebody's complaining about something or saying something that they're struggling with, and we just want to say, do this, do that, do this, do that, and we're not listening. Sometimes the person who wants to come and confess with us and talk to us, they just wants to hear it, right? Us to hear it and listen to what's going on, right? And if possible, we say something. But more beautifully is when we address a situation with an action of kindness, right? Exemplifying goodness, kindness, and all that above, right? So we learn from James that he recommends in his epistle 5:6, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. This confession, beneficial and necessary for human fellowship, is a fraternal and frank dialogue through which we can clarify or prevent misunderstandings, deepen understanding, and maintain harmony, review repentance and a desire for readjustment and reconciliation, expose problems and difficulties to those who can understand and help us very clearly. who can understand and help us. Not necessarily the person that we are at fault with will allow us to um, reconcile, right? We have to be careful with that as well, not to create more animosity, right? If we have the ability to go and confess, in front of that person, say, look, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I did something that I shouldn't have. I would like to repair, right? This tough situation that I created. It's beautiful if we can go ahead and get to that point of a relationship that we can address things here as we're walking, right? As we learn from the gospel as well. And then a public confession. It can strengthen us so as to not find ourselves again doing things that we vowed not to repeat. Because when made before all, with a promise of not failing again, excuse me, the sense of personal dignity lead us to try to keep the commitment publicly made. John only baptized those who publicly confess their repentance, right? Um, and this is another point as well that it's important for us to say that look, um, if there is an opportunity to publicly, it's not like that we're going to go ahead and go and say things, on YouTube or anything like that. If you want to do it, be my guest. But I'm quite sure that you will have some adverse responses as well. But the idea here is to bring a group of people that will, that has been perhaps affected by your action, right? Your unfortunate action, and say, look, guys, I would like to address this. I'm sorry, I did something wrong that needs to be addressed, or a person who is responsible for that group of people. There is a very beautiful, interesting case on the book On the Way to a World of Regeneration, where a spirit, one of the workers of a spiritist center, does something extremely difficult at the spirit center and creates a very difficult challenge to the rest of the spiritist center. And he at one point he was not subjugated, if you will, by dark minds. He did not acknowledge that the problem was there. He was rescued, he was helped, and then he comes to his senses, and then he goes back to the president of the spirit centers and the spirit center and say, look, here's my resignation. I don't want to do this again. I want to continue helping the best way that I can, but I don't want to be in this position anymore. But beautifully enough, the spirit center, the president of the spirit center, actually turns back to him and say, no, you're going to continue to do what you were doing before, more responsibly than ever now, and you carry on. We're not perfect. Obviously, there was this understanding between the two of them, but this president was the, let's say, the person responsible to this group of people, this public confession that he made, right? Because obviously those involved would be addressed as well of what this man who was doing wrong before, now coming back to his sense, came back and said something beautiful and regained his ability to carry on his task. Moving on. It is highly necessary when it comes to repair evils that have harmed others in a public manner, and it spreads the truth swiftly and widely, right? We see this public, announcement sometimes happening with politicians, people that, are public individuals, and they have to do this, right? They address something that they did not do well in the past. So it begs me to also pay attention to these moments and be kind to other individuals, right? Be respectful of their vulnerability, right? Because imagine how hard it is to go back and say I made a mistake publicly. So this is really interesting. It's a tough moment for that individual. It's a tough moment for those around them, right? Because they're not alone, right? And imagine as well in the spirit side of things, right? Of the minds that are connected with these individuals. So this is not only for the person that is going to be directly connected with the situation, but us who are indirectly being, let's say, we have an indirect connection with, right? So, let us be respectful. Let us pray for those moments because very dignifying, but for sure very hard. And In any of these three forms, we have the Christian confession, which constitutes our most sincere and open communication with God and neighbor. Confession that frees us from anxieties, tensions, fears, and guilt complexes, renewing our possibilities before ourselves and others. In addition, it is a form of charity to know how to listen, to accept, to excuse, to reassure, and to give guide, um, and to guide those who seek us for a fraternal compassion. So, 2 points, right? Those who are doing the act in the act of confession, meaning, let's say I do something wrong, I go and I confess, right? And I expose myself, I show my vulnerability, I ask for help, as well as to the other side who is listening to me saying, look, I made a mistake, I need help, I'm going to do A, B, C, and D. So how are those individuals receiving it, right? So whichever side we are, this is a very Christian like moment because Jesus allowed us to do this, right? He invited people to show their vulnerability, not to be to so he could express pity in terms of, oh, poor you, no, but to rehabilitate, right? Because it does free us when we are confessing, it does free us, as it says here, from our anxieties, tensions, fears, and and the guilt complexes that we have. And I like to say, here's my vulnerability to you. I have many of them. We do have our anxieties. We feel our tensions. We feel in our bodies, right? Sometimes we have that shoulder pain thinking, oh my God, what is this? Tension, right? I feel in my spine, right? When I'm too tense, right? All my muscles, my spine, being tall, I'm 6'3", and any little difficult thing that comes along emotionally, it goes right into my spine, right? It's the Achilles tendon, right, that we have when we go through an issue. Something hurts. Some individuals, they have problems, with what they eat. If they eat something and they're not doing well emotionally, their stomach don't settle, way, in the right way. Headaches, right? Other pains, whatever that may be. So many issues that shows up in our physical body. Thank God for the physical body, but for sure we have them. But then if we're on the other side, it allows us to be a good listener, acceptance, right? To excuse people because we're not perfect yet, right? And to reassure that we are a good brother, a good sister, right? Moving on. And then, excuse me, we have the so-called auricular confession. As we mentioned before, she also does address this, which is important. Is what we learned from the churches, right? And it did not exist among early Christians. It was instituted later on the grounds that Jesus would have supposedly giving the apostle a special power for the remission of sins that were confessed to them. Well, Jesus absolutely did not grant anyone a license to instead of God decide on human errors. Who on earth would be able to know if a confession is complete and if a contrition is true? One's individual's conscience is sacred and depends only on God directly. This is beautiful because it readdresses what we have learned from the churches. And I'm not here to, to put the church down, saying that they're doing this, doing that. Folks, let's take a step back here. We're in different levels of understanding of God, understanding of Jesus is, understanding, the teachings that the master brought to us. And for sure, we don't apply them in the same way, right? So it's only fair to say that our brothers and sisters who need this work, is that is good for them, that brings them comfort, right? I have friends who, um, very close, moments in our lives growing up, I thought that person was going to become a priest, right? Because he was so in the Catholic teachings and works, and it was amazing. To me, a perfect example of life. He's now married. He has a son. His son is actually called Peter, and it's a beautiful man, a beautiful individual who embraces Catholicism and the works of the church. And he preaches by, he works by, he lives by it, and it brings them joy. And they're very active in the work as well. So who am I to say that this does not help them? It has helped me before, right? And it helps me understand our connection with our Creator, without which we wouldn't be here now. We have to remember that the reason we're sitting and we're having this talk right now, because this all this work of the past have served us somehow, either for the good, unfortunately sometimes for the bad, but even the bad has put us where we are right now. Let us think this way, because at least to me it helps me understand that, you know what, yeah, maybe now it doesn't serve me much, but it has served me in the past and has brought me to, it has helped me become who I am right now, this beautiful thing, right, that we are. In any case, going back to this is that, look, we learned that we had to sit down with someone and we had to say our sins, our vulnerabilities, and something was prescribed to us. Something was told, okay, do A, B, and C, and you will be helped, right? There's more to it. In Spiritism, we learn a lot about responsibility. Much like if I go to your home and and I eat something, or I do something, I take something out of its place. Guess what? One would expect that I would want to put those elements, whatever I did in your home, back to its place, right? At least clean after myself, do something, right? Or not do something that is going to destroy the environment, right? Or disorganize the environment, right? It's the same thing in life. We learn through Spiritism this responsibility that, look, once you do something that you take life out of its quote unquote normal place, because what's normal for me is not normal for you, you will bear the responsibility, whether you will like it or not, to go back and put it back, right? And that's the idea here, right? So it's not only the fact that I will sit down and we'll talk to somebody, I will prescribe, somebody prescribes me A, B, and C, and that things will be okay. No, much like our physical bodies. And I want to touch on this because it's very important for us here. Much like our physical bodies, yeah, we feel a pain as we're talking about the back pain, right? It's not only the prescribing ibuprofen or something that will help with the pain, but to really analyze what needs to go back to its place. Sometimes it's not the physical body, but sometimes it's how the our environment is the type of environment that we're living, our intentions that will certainly generate certain emotions, and we need to kind of like go back and address that as well. The help with the ibuprofen is one thing, but the foundation, if we don't tackle, if we don't change what is truly wrong, guess what? The headache, the backache, whatever it will be, will come back. So it's not just a confession, right? But truly analyzing what's wrong, what's out of place. And on what basis would they have any grounds to institute what they call the sacrament of confession? In that statement made by Jesus, in what basis would they have any ground to institute what they call the sacrament, right? So here is something that we really need to pay attention. Who is in this position of listen to us, really of sitting down and listen to our confession? And again, what kind of confession are we saying? There are certain things that we don't like to say. I know I'm taking too much time on this part over here, but there's one thing that we learn a lot with Spiritism when we were helping our brothers and sisters with fraternal assistance. And yes, in the Spiritist Center, we have what we call fraternal assistance. What is it? It's a moment that where an individual comes to the Spiritist Center, they're going through an issue, and they ask to speak with someone. It's not going to be this or that person, but a person who has some understanding about spiritism first and foremost, the understanding of what are the tools within spiritism that we can offer that individual, sometimes a couple or a group of people that are going through an issue right at that moment. And then we sit down for an hour, we read a passage of an inspiring book, um, and then the person will come and say, I'm going through A, B, and C in life. Before we even start the conversation, after we read the inspiration, we tell the person, look, please say what's necessary. Please say what you feel that it's going to reserve you, to put in a reserve mode. What are we trying to say? That sometimes people in the moments of aggravation, difficulties of their lives, they're very vulnerable. They say things that later on they may regret, right? So we always tell them, look, if you have something to say, reserve yourself. Speak of the bare minimum that will allow you to bring it out, right? To breathe, right? But don't say stuff that later on you will go back and say, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that." Even though in the spiritual center we vote with our hearts to whatever we hear from a brother or sister that will stay with us, that we will give to the higher minds to help them and help us as well, because we're learning with them, right? So it's a blessing just to be there to listen to those individuals. So because we're not in this position that to tell people you have to say A, B, and C. I need to know everything, the truth, but nothing and nothing but the truth. No, we're here to help. We're here to show the give them the guidance. Okay, there's a beautiful book that you can read. Come and have the passes. Come and watch this talk or that talk. This is the work of the Spiritist Center. But there's something also that I would like to mention here that is also in the book that is very interesting. That it's a statement really interesting to be analyzed, brought by our Master Jesus in a couple places. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you lose on earth shall be loosed in heaven as well. So whatever we bind on earth, whatever we put our mind to it on earth, will be bound to it as well in heaven, and whatever we lose on earth and will be lost as well in heaven. This phrase is very interesting because it has a double meaning. Let's analyze how this can be understood. In Matthew 18:18, the subject is forgiveness of offenses, right? In this case, what Jesus explained is that those who do not forgive become attached to the offender by mental and fluidic bonds, grudges, resentment, revolt. If reconciliation is not viable, let us try and forgive and forget everything, so as to detach ourselves from the offender and not suffer spiritual harm. So here's the thing: it's a connection that we establish, the negative connection that we establish here on earth, and if we do so, we will take them with us after we discarnate, after we lose the physical body. That connection will stay. If we don't disconnect from it, it's not like, oh, push things away, right? Oh, I don't want to hear about this. I don't want to, talk with this individual. I don't want to remember the situation. No, we have to digest it. We have to analyze it. We have to process it in a way where it happened. We acknowledge that it happened, but we're not attached to it. So that when we discarnate, we will go ahead and have a different perspective altogether. So on the other side of this is that if we if we do disconnect, is that on the other side we will not bear any mind to what has happened. When I say this, is that we will be free of these worries, unnecessary worries that we had perhaps gone through in the physical body, right? So it's a beautiful thing of forgiveness, of letting it go, so we don't take to the other side, so we don't continue to suffer on the other side. On the other hand, though, there's a different perspective about this as well, is that in Matthew 16:13, 19, Peter receives a spiritual revelation that Jesus is the Christ. Jesus states that his church assembly will rely on such a spiritual communication, and that Peter will have the keys of the kingdom of heaven. As a medium, it will serve for the mediumistic interchange as well, in terms of the assembly, right, of us mediums, working at the Spirit Center. But let us take it in general, right? Those who learn the mediumistic exchange will also have, like Peter, the keys of the kingdom, as she's saying. But what happens here is the following. Let's say we establish good things on planet Earth. Let's say we start a work, a spiritual work on planet Earth, on the physical body. This is beautiful, right? A spiritual work in the physical body. If we do the best we can, and we start to enlighten minds and hearts, right? Guess what? The work will continue as we go to the other side. There we say, again, whatever we bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. You see the opposite side now? And whatever we lose on earth shall be lost in heaven as well. So, what if we are given the capability to start a good work or to do something great with our lives, but we don't do it? Guess what? If we lose here on earth the opportunity, it will be lost as well in heaven. It's not that God will not give us another opportunity, But that opportunity, unfortunately, time has passed. We didn't seize the opportunity, like we like to say, in the business world, right? Guess what? It's gonna be the same thing in our lives, right? So that's why sometimes this phrase can have a double meaning here. We just have to make sure that we are applying ourselves, giving the the right tone to it. In Teresia says only after this passage does the repetition of the phrase about binding or losing on earth and heaven come across once more, which make much more sense in the other passage. Now, in this other text of Matthew, it seems like an undue interpolation, since each and every one is binding or losing all the time by what he or she thinks, feels, and does, both in spiritual life, heaven, and in material life on earth. So, again, a double meaning for us to study a little bit, but always remember this, especially in the idea of forgiveness, right? Because we're talking about confession. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you lose on earth shall be loosed in heaven, right? Going to the end stretch of the actual book, because we're going to dive into some other things here. Jesus the bread in John 6 and 53, Jesus speaks of himself, of his mission. In his mission, I am the bread of life who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. He also says that in order to have life, we must eat his flesh and drink his blood. However, he explained that he was walking symbolically, right? And we see the reference here. What he meant to say was Jesus came from higher planes, descended from heaven, to offer the truth to the created beings now on earth, the teachings bread that nourishes the soul, and thereby make them live spiritually to give life, right? For we generally live almost exclusive for the things of the material world. As long as people assimilate his teachings, learn from his example, imitate his experience, eat his flesh, and drink his blood. And I say this very slowly because we kind of need to give a different analysis to this work, right? It's to exercise his teachings, to multiply his teachings, right? His way of life. That's why at the beginning we try to invite you to reestablish the the connection that we have with God, as well as the most perfect example that has been given by God to us, our Master Jesus, right? So where are we with this after we read this, right? How are we eating of the flesh? How are we drinking of the blood, right? I know for many of us, especially me, who did not have any initiation in the let's say a more acute or more um, direct connection with any church, right? Understands this, right? Many of us, like me, needs this help interpreting these teachings, because it can be right, up in the air, flying around, and you're like, huh, what are they trying to say with this? And many people still interpret this in a very materialistic way, right? Unfortunately, but again, just for us to um, understand this. What is the Eucharist or communion? What is it? I mean, what is this idea of communion? Eucharist is the actual work of communion, right? Communion would be the actual moment that we go and we have this communion, this confession, right? Jesus also said, "Whoever feeds on me, he also will live because of me," as we have seen. This is called communion, with having communication, sharing, being united in his beliefs, ideas, and conduct. This right here is the basis of everything when we talk about communion. In the Paschal Supper, when the date of his leaving this world was already closed, Jesus used again the symbols of bread, teaching, and wine, the spiritual essence of life, his example, which he distributed among the disciples, meaning that he was giving his life for them and for the sake of many. And it is true, right? Because when we learn, which I don't have right here, I love this book entitled The Way, the Truth, in Life. I don't think you can see there, but it's because of my screen, or I guess you can see it now. Yes. by Emmanuel, the Spirit Emmanuel, through the hands of Chico Xavier, from this Living Spring collection, right? Emmanuel comes, takes an extract of the Bible, and gives us beautiful ideas to ponder upon and work on, right? And it is all what the Master had taught us, right? In to exemplify, to try to imitate, the good. We often come across people say at this time of the year that, oh, it's okay to have a cold. Everybody has one right now. It's allergy season, right? Because the weather is changing here up north. And I always, challenge those individuals, and I say, no, just because everyone is sick, I don't have to be sick. Just because everyone has a cold, I don't have to have a cold. I don't like to get to be sick, to become ill of the physical body. So I have to prevent it, right? I wash my hands. I do everything that I can to help myself, not, have the flu. We can get vaccinated. We can do different things, whatever it may be, that we can multiply so that we don't get sick. And I think the calling here is the same. Just because the whole planet is going crazy about a specific topic or situation, I don't have to be in the same vibration. I want to be the one out of the curve because it allows me to focus on different other things, right, that are more important to me. And this is not an egotistical way, folks. It's just a way for us to give a different meaning to life. But let's move on because we still have to cover a couple of things here. Then he asks, "Do this in remembrance of me." Right? His followers heeded that request. They continued to remember and follow the teachings of Jesus, lived in community, share what they had with everyone. There was indeed communion among early Christians, and I also would add there's communion. There was communion after as well as today. We see a lot of great things happening under the Christian arena, right? That it really helps us to evolve in by ourselves or as well as collectively as well, right? In any case, to commune with Jesus. Jesus wanted his disciples and apostles to commune with him, but he prayed that other would come to believe in him and commune with him as well. That they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you. So look, the way to get to our Creator is through Jesus, is through the examples that he brought to us to go back to the Father, right? And that's why he says that the Father was in him as he was in us as well. Let us commune with Jesus, that is, let us try to understand and live his teachings, to follow his examples, to love God and neighbor. Thus, we will participate more and more in his ideas, feelings, and actions, getting united to him more and more until we reach a perfect communion. And by being united with Jesus, we will also be united with the divine will, right? So I want to shift a little bit now and kind of bring all this information together, but within ourselves, right? The next step is for us to really digest, but to find within us how we connect with our Creator, with what we started here, jumping out of the book before we start the book, analyzing, the initiation to Spiritism, the parts of the initiation into Spiritism. Information that I'm bringing here, it can be found again on the Spirit's book, God and Our Relation with the Creator. How do what is inside of us, right? How do we establish this connection with our Creator to find out what we have to confess? How do we confess? And what should we say? To whom should we say? And then one of the interesting point that I like to bring here is to the idea of getting to know ourselves, right? The ability to improve ourselves. Because when we are communing with God, when we are confessing, technically what we're trying to do is to improve ourselves, isn't it? Isn't it the idea of confession to say I made a mistake and I want to um, do it better, right? Isn't it a awakening within us saying, wow, If somebody were to say to do this onto me, I would be upset. I would be pretty sad about this whole thing, right? So we go and we try to rescue that, right? And in the fourth part of the Spirit's book, addressing the moral laws, let me say moral perfection, we see a beautiful question. I never forget this question. The numbers always comes to mind in many topics that we discuss here. 919, where it says, "What is the most?" The question is, "What is the most effective means for improving ourselves in this life and for resisting the draw of evil?" And the answer is amazingly very simple. A sage of antiquity has told you, "Know thyself." Okay, Leo, very simplistic. Yes, it is. And I know it's not easy. Knowing ourselves is not easy at all. We do everything that we can to avoid it, right? First of all, we try to run from ourselves. We try to run from we give it excuses. We blame others. We blame God. We deny God. We deny our existence, right? And we live this life of running from ourselves, right? But we are at a point, I believe, on planet Earth right now that we're coming to a point, or that we already there, excuse me, that we're now saying, yes, there is a problem. We need to acknowledge that we acknowledge that there is a problem, and where it is, I don't know. So I think now we're going to the idea of like, no, it's inside of me, it's within me, because my neighbor very seldom will change overnight. So who needs to change? Ourselves. How do we do this, right? What is the idea here that is brought by the Spirit to address this? We comprehend all the wisdom of that maxim, but the difficulty is precisely in knowing ourselves, right? So Kardec asks in the follow-up question right here, by what means can we do so? And then here's the answer. I would like to say it with you, because this is going to be the to do homework, right, for all of us, and engage in this idea of confession and communion in a much more elevated way. Look what is brought as an answer, and we'll have a little surprise for you at the end, and who actually wrote this passage as the answer. A little bit long. Know thyself. Do what I used to do when I was living on the earth. At the end of each day, I examine my conscience, review what I had done, and ask myself whether or not I had failed to fulfill some duty, and whether or not anyone had reason to complain about me. It was thus that I arrived at knowing myself and seeing what there was in me that needed to be reformed. Those who every night would recall all their actions during the day and would ask themselves what good or evil they had done, praying to God and their guardian angel to enlighten them, would acquire great strength for self improvement, because, believe me, God will assist them. Therefore, formulate your questions, asking about what you have done and towards what aim you act in a particular circumstance, whether you have done anything that you would blame in others, and whether you have done anything that you would not dare profess. Also ask if it pleased God to anyone's glance. Excuse me. If if it pleased God to call me at this moment, sorry, to enter the world of spirit, whether where nothing is hidden, would I cower at anyone's glance? Examine what you may have done against God, then against your neighbor, and lastly against yourselves. The answers will be either repose for your conscience or an indication of a wrong that you must amend. To finalize this part, he says, self knowledge is therefore the key to individual improvement. But you will ask, how do we judge ourselves? One be under the illusion of vanity. One we be under the illusion of vanity, which exalts our faults and makes them excusable. Misers think they are simply being thrifty and foresightful, while proud individuals think they are only full of dignity. All of this is quite true, but you have a means of control that cannot deceive you. When you are indecisive as to the quality of any of your actions, ask how you would judge it if it had been done by someone else. If you would blame it in another, it cannot be any more legitimate for you. For God does not use two measures for justice. Also seek to know what others think about you, and do not neglect the opinion of your enemies, because they have no interest in disguising the truth. Frequently, God places them beside you as a mirror in order to warn you more frankly than a friend would. Therefore, let those who are truly willing to improve themselves examine their own conscience in order to uproot from it their evil tendencies as they uproot weeds from their garden. Let them balance out their moral workday like businesses, business persons do with their profits and losses. And I can assure you that there will be more profits than losses. If you can say that your workday has been good, you can sleep in peace and fiercely wait for your awakening in the other life. To finalize, folks, so formulate clear and precise questions and do not be afraid to add to them. You would be very you would do very well to devote a few minutes to securing eternal bliss. Don't you work every day to accumulate what you will need for rest in old age? Isn't this rest the object of all your desires, the goal that enables you to endure temporary fatigue and privation? Well, then, what is the rest of a few days, troubled by the infirmities of the body, compared to what awaits in moral persons, right? Awaits the moral persons, isn't worth a little effort. I know that many will say that that the present is positive, but the future is uncertain. That is precisely the thought that we have been charged with, tearing down in your minds, for we desire to enable you to understand that the future in such a way that no doubt can remain in your soul. This is why we first called your attention to us through the phenomena of nature, which touch your senses, and later we gave you instruction that each one of us has a duty to spread. It was with this purpose in mind that we have dictated this spirit book. Saint Augustine, as you could see the picture right here at the beginning, I always like to use art to share these passages. And I know it's a lot, it's quite a bit, but we can find this right after question 919 of the Spirit's book, a beautiful, let's say, guideline for us to confess, for us to connect with God in a much, much higher tone, reminding ourselves that it's not what I have accomplished in terms of I am this person, I am that person, but no, it's how we relate with one another, how I relate with myself, therefore how I relate with our dear Creator. Confession in a much more elevated way, directly with God, allowing ourselves that perhaps after we make this analysis and say, perhaps I do need to go back and speak with John, whom I did not do so well today, right? Who I caused some difficulties in his life, right? Perhaps to his family as well, or perhaps the group of people that was, where John was, right? So it's important for us to um, make this self-analysis at the end of the day, so that we can address with others in the future as well. Whether we have the capability to do here in the now, or perhaps in by prayer, because sometimes, unfortunately, excuse me, we're not given the opportunity to address things with other people, right? And we just have to ask for the opportunity to come through other individuals, through other circumstances, or perhaps in the future, in this lifetime, or perhaps in future life gatherings, right? In a new reincarnation, because unfortunately they have passed, right? And it's not for us to beat ourselves up, because God will grant us the other opportunities. Truly, to finalize, people, the sacrifice most pleased to God, as we have said at the beginning, it is those that we perhaps, when we remind ourselves, when we go to the altar, as we have said at the beginning, and we remember that we have something, somebody has something against us, let's go readdress it. That is the sacrifice most pleasing to God, and can be found on the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 10, item 7, entitled Blessed Are the Merciful, right? Where we learn that is not just to call words to God and say, "Oh my God, I need your help. I need this. I am so and so." No, it's for us to address our mistakes, our wrongdoings, to seize the opportunities that we have to be charitable, right? When we have to listen to one another, and charity and love for our neighbor, right? That is addressed on question 886. What is the true meaning of the word charity as Jesus understood it? Benevolence towards everyone, indulgence towards the imperfection of others, and forgiveness for offenses as well. So, for all of this, we come together to say, let us confess, let us live in communion, right? But it is up to you to take this information now and develop your own ways, right? And to develop your a better understanding of what the ways that we were confessing before, the ways we're living in communion before. If there are certain things that you need to tweak a little bit, or a lot, or perhaps to enhance it in a way that I've been doing some of this already, but I need to kind of strategize a little bit more when I formulate my questions, as Saint Augustine actually have mentioned, right? That is more, let's say, proactive, more um, uh, charitable towards others, right? Towards ourselves as well. When we talk about charity and love here, we need to apply this towards ourselves first. We need to make ourselves the um, patient, right, before we apply it to others. Why? Because for sure we have elements inside of us that will guide us to say, be more kind to yourself, be more caring to yourselves. Stop beating ourselves up, because once we master this ability to deal with ourselves more kindly, I am quite sure that you will be more kind to those around you as well. It's a fact, right? That's why we always reminded, do unto others as you would like to be done unto yourselves, right? So if there's something that is not helping us, that wouldn't help us, why we wouldn't do to others, why would we do to ourselves? We can flip it, right? And say, no, this does not serve me anymore. Why would I punish myself, right? Why would I do things that would be harmful to me? For sure, I wouldn't do to others. So this is the idea. I hope that this has helped in this communion with God, in this understanding on how we relate to our Creator, reminding ourselves that God is this supreme intelligence, right? That God is this beautiful Creator, not the punishing one. And Jesus has been given to us, right, to guide us, to guide humanity, and to live a ever more fulfilling life. So I'll pass it on then to our comments and questions if we have any. I would like to listen to you. If you don't have comments or questions at this moment, please send them to me later. I would love to discuss with you your encounters with this idea of communion in the connection with God. I'll ask here
Hi.
Marcel.
We have a couple of questions if you have maybe 10, 15 more minutes.
That's perfectly fine. Yes, let's go
All
for it.
right. So let's get started with one that is a reference to the book A Full Life, and it is quite interesting. And it says the following. I don't know if we can see it. In A Full Life by Joanna de Angelis, she states, one always strives for the victories of the world, but not the demands of the world, which are the spiritual values, without abandoning human duties. How does connecting with our Creator help us with our spiritual values?
One always strives for the victories of the world, but not the demand of the world. I'll give an example. The way I interpret this, the way I understand this, and how this connects with us is the following. Um, we want to go to someone's house that we know that the person who is going through whatever issue that they have, right? A loss of someone, for example, or perhaps they they didn't get a job or something, whatever comes to mind. And we all have an example within us right at this moment, right? Somebody, we know somebody that is going through a tough moment. We are going through a tough moment, and quite often we want to address the situation the way we think is the right way. We often forget to ask the person, "What do you need?" Right? And here we see that, we want to show off and be, the victorious person by offering what we think is right, and we forget the demand of that individual. What is truly that individual going through, right? And it perhaps it's not a gift, or flowers, but the person wants a hug. The person wants,
Yeah.
to vent, right? And I'm bringing this back to us because then we can extrapolate and see the victories of the world, us, getting titles, become this or that in the company or whatnot, but we forget the demands of the world, right? And and then she says, which are the spiritual values without abandoning human duties. Yes, the duty is what? To attend. We go and do what we're supposed to do, but what will bring us the spiritual value is not what I'm presenting, bringing to the altar, as we said earlier, but my heart, right, to that moment, right? Sometimes that speaks for itself. The person is there physically, but spiritually and even mentally is not there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does this connect with our creator? Perhaps we're not connected. I don't think we are connected with our creator because this is not what we're being called to do. And we need to reevaluate our capabilities, our purposes. And I would say, um, with that, I would also bring responsibility back to the resources that we are wasting, right? Because we have the tools. It's much like you have a tool shed, full of beautiful, resources, but it's just wasting away. It's just rotting away, right? And I think this is the callings that we're going through right now in our evolutionary path, where there's much to be done, but very little accomplished. And I say this to myself, folks. I said at the beginning, I'm still trying to master this as well, because I often go back and say, wow, I could have done this, right? And which one of us that do not go through this feeling? The key is what we do with it, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we like to beat ourselves and we go into that guilty trip. No, you take that example and say, in that hole, I'm not gonna fall again.
Correct.
Godinho, actually, who is actually Jorge Godinho, who is actually the president of the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, always reminded us of a beautiful passage the of our Master Jesus, is that he fell many many times carrying the cross, but never in the same spot. And that is like, and obviously this comes from Emmanuel for sure. Never in the same spot. He would fall, get up, walk, fall again. And we should, do the aim the same way. Yeah, we're gonna fall now. Let us get up. We'll know that we're gonna fall in the future. That's okay. But we know that also we'll get up again and keep going, right? Until the day that
Absolutely.
we're not carrying anything heavy anymore and we're liberating lives. So hopefully that helps.
Yes. We have a question from Champagne. She says it's a tough one. So thank you, Champagne, for asking that. She said, I have a question. This is very new to me, but I'm wondering, I lost my little brother to him getting murdered last year. How can I get over the blame in blaming source or blaming God?
Wow, that is really difficult. First of all, I'm sorry for this, and I'm sorry for this individual who also um, did such an act, right? Um, there is an acknowledgement that I like to make, in terms of our dear Creator for us all, right? And I like to say each one of us, sees God in a different way. We'll understand God in a different way. And by far, I do not have a specific answer, nor mainly because I've never been through a situation like this. I have, lost, loved ones, not in a tragic or traumatic way like this. Um, and I'm saying what I'm trying to say is that all of that happens around us, right? um, sparks emotion. It sparks, the generate feelings, right? Where we have feelings towards our environment that will spark us emotion. And what has happened has impacted you severely, and impacted your consideration towards God, right? But we learned with Spiritism, one of the beauty of the Spiritism is that, the successive lives, right? Reincarnation. And if we accept reincarnation thereafter, we also have to acknowledge something that came before, right? This explains, this does not justifies what happens in the in our lives, because the issues like this is to be analyzed in on an off basis. But I want to generalize here, and please forgive me if I have to do this here, or for doing this here, is that um, we have to take in acknowledge our past, as well as with that we have to acknowledge as well our future. Where are we now with our emotions, and where we'll be in the future, right? How do we accept this? It's hard. How do we project ourselves in the future? It's hard because we're very materialistic. I am very materialistic. I don't want to have a loss, especially the way you had your loss. But at the same time, is how do we take this energy with our Creator, who created us, because we're here, we're talking, right? Whether through the mechanism of the internet, we're here, we're alive, right? So
Mhm.
with that in mind, there is a Creator that allows us to live, that allows us to continue, as well as when we go to the other side. So there will be other chances. There will be other ways that we will be able to see life and become ever more together, whether in the physical or not. That later on we'll have better answers to understand and not blame God, not blame your brother, not blame the one who did the act in the ways that we do now, and understand things a little bit more. Once more, the traumas of life will diminish with time, with understanding, with persistence, never by blaming, never by disconnecting with God. Because when we are judging God, you didn't do this way or that way, we're disconnecting from it, because God is the supreme intelligence of the universe. And I'm not saying this to push, down through anybody's throat, but to say, wait a minute, it's love, right? I don't understand it now, but in the future, hopefully, it will give me. I will have the grace to understand. What I would say to you directly is press on, continue living your life, praying for your brother, pray as well for the other side. I know it's really hard, and I'll be praying for you as well. I never had a question like this before, and it makes me emotional as well. But I I hope that you find some ways to dignify your connection with God, even though you have this difficult to carry with you, and and change in the future, right? And look at God and say thank you for the better understanding of life, and for my brother as well.
I would like to take a moment to actually show Yasko Arakawa mentioned something in earlier, right, which it says to get to trust by whatever means that God and our benefactors are around us 24 by 7, and that they can be reached through prayer is vital for moments when we or loved ones are facing life struggles. So I think, Yasko, thank you so much for that message. And I think it's very pertinent to this discussion here today. Thank you.
It is, yes, always praying, right? Connecting. If I may, Martha, real quick, yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
Kirsten was talking about our connection with our Creator as well at the center. And one thing that I love to do, sometimes I'm like, what am I going to ask? Because we learn in Spiritism, right? Praise, ask, and give thanks, right?
Yeah.
The CPR, right? No, they're not the CPR. There's another acronym, but it's one thing that I like to connect with God. In after the center, I gave them the example. We were eating edamame, right? Whatever you call the little um, seed thing. We're not. I forget the name now.
Edamame. Yeah, edamame.
Edamame,
Yeah.
right? But I forget the. It's a vegetable, right? Anyway, and I was popping them out very slowly, looking at it. I'm like, what a beautiful thing. Who created this? So it's my way to to connect with God. When when I look at the dog, when I look at our physical body, when sometimes I'm breathing, because the water reminds me to breathe, I'm like, my lungs are actually, capturing the oxygen, and and bringing oxygen to my whole body, my the connection between my circulatory system and the respiratory and all these things. So I'm like, I have these moments with God and saying thank you, right? So to me, that's the way I connect with the higher being, right? And it's beautiful, just stuff like that. Sometimes I think, am I the only one doing this? Because I find myself like, how cool this is, it's like a
Yes.
kid finding something. So I think that, if we were to add this to our moments of prayer, find something that excites you, right? Be the discovery channel of yourself, like of your mind, where you look at the animals like how beautiful this is, right? So I think that is something that I would add to everyone here, to be grateful, with for what we have.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Leo. Thank you, everyone who's been able to be here live and those who will be watching this recording in the future. I want to say this is a really important message, the message of connecting and connecting with our feelings, not exterior expressions of how we connect with God, but how we feel about God. So thank you. Leo, would you mind saying a final prayer before we go?
Certainly, thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for this great opportunity to bring the seeds of love to our brothers and sisters, to remind myself once more of all these teachings, right, that we have. This way, connecting with our mentors, our Master Jesus, and our Creator. May these reconnections be established, dear Lord. May the difficulties that we have been facing individually, collectively, not destroy our what we have established thus far, but the opposite, strength, the faith that we have within ourselves towards one another and towards you. That our Master Jesus is the chief in command of this planet Earth, guiding us all. That our brothers and sisters who are going through tough and difficult moments, hard to forget, hard to forgive, can find consolation, can find some point that they can rely on and strengthen their connection with you. We bring the image in our hearts of our brothers, disciples who were living with our Master Jesus, how they felt when our Master Jesus was crucified, how lost they were, how abandoned they felt of seeing the Master being crucified and not be amongst themselves anymore. Let us bring this image to our hearts. And we know that for many of us, this is how we feel right now. But then we invite everyone to also contemplate the return of our Master, the excitement of seeing, of all the disciples seeing our Master Jesus coming back, showing to them that there is life after life, that the communion would continue in a more elevated way, and let us partake on this excitement, this happiness of living with our Master Jesus, of staying with Him, even though He is not next to us in the physical body, but He is in us, as He reminded us that He is, and He is with our dear Creator. This way, we give thanks for this moment and for many other moments to come, and so be it.